Hello, and welcome to Varnblog Radical Engagements. And today we are starting an essay by Bertell Ollman called Fetish Flag in the Illusory Community. I believe this was published sometime in the late aughts. I don't have an exact date for it. My version of it comes from Marxist.org, and you will find my link in the show notes. Bertell Ollman is a professor of politics at New York University. He teaches primarily dialectical methodology and socialist theory. He is the creator of Class Struggle, the board game, which is a very interesting thing that was released by Avalon Hill in the 70s, I believe. His book Alienation, Marx's Concept of Man and Capitalist Society, released by Cambridge in 1971, is kind of a classic. He also did a book on Marx and William Wright called Social and Sexual Revolution. He co-edited Dialectics: A New Frontier, a special issue of Science and Society in 1998. And my favorite book by him is Dance of the Dialectic Steps and Marx's Method from 2003. If you want to understand kind of Marxist Hegelian dialectical thinking, that's the book to go to, as far as I'm concerned. I don't necessarily agree with it as a process, but I do agree that that's what Marx more or less did and thought. So Bertell Ollman's kind of a useful guy in that regard. He's an old man now. He's 88 years old. But I wanted to talk about his essay, Flag Fetish in the Illusory Community. And the version of it I found is from around 2012, but I think Flag Fetish in the Illusory Community is much older than that. There's a version of it against the current that was published in 2012. So that seems to be the earliest date I can find for it. So let's just start from there. And I'll link both versions, both the Against the Current version and the Marxist.org version in the show notes. This is Ollman. Patriotism is usually understood as love of country. With the help of Marxist theories of state and alienation, we will explore what is meant by love and country, both in quotations, in this definition. By viewing society as a contradictory relation between a social community based on cooperation required by existing divisions of labor and an illusory community dominated by the interests of the ruling class, it will become apparent that the country which patriots love, the social community, is not the country which they actually live in, the illusory community. Now, the illusory community there, this is where I'm talking, is obviously a reference to the imagined community, I think, of Benedict Anderson. Imagined communities would have been a well-established theory of nations and nationalism by this time, but I don't know that Ullman cites it. All right. The love of country that patriots feel is akin to learning for solidarity and mutual concern that exists within the social community, but has no place in the illusory one. Patriotic symbols, particularly the flag, enable the government of the illusory community to redirect those sentiments to support the regime's political agenda. Varn talking here. There's already an interesting duality of a illusory community, which is a political community, which is the actual government, and the social community, which are the people that you know and live with and feel solidarity for. I would talk, if I was going to go into where the social community impulse comes from, because I see it as damn near universal, I would go and read Marshall Solins's Kinship, What It Is and What It Isn't, which you probably can't see it, but it's actually on the shelf over there, right there. It's actually my finger's about on it. Actually, right over there. All right. And for those of you who are not listening, I was just pointing to my back shelf where I have the Marshall Solomons book. But on kinship, the symbolization of kinship as necessary for human survival in early societies, and why solidarity is like one of, not the only trait that we have that enables us to survive. I don't love trying to reduce, like, are humans altruistic or selfish? We're both, man. It's not hard to see that in our development, our comparisons to other primates or other mammals. Anyway, back to the text. Crucial to this effort is the dual character of these symbols as both symbols and fetishes. The alienated human powers employed in the creation of these entities come to be viewed as the latter's natural qualities, to which the very people from whom they came must now respond. This is Varn talking. This is the whole social relations are symbolized by an object. The object stands in for the relationship. Then we respond to the object as if we're responding to a relationship, creating our new relationships based on the object. The idea of this, most crucially in Das Kapital, is money. Money is a social relationship and a physical thing. Our, when credit is sufficiently developed, it's not just a physical thing; it's also an abstract thing. But we start responding to the thing, the power manifested in the social relationship, from trade as contained through production, which is a thing in itself and has cost to maintain, into what drives us in lieu of that relationship. So it both emerges out of social relations, the relations of production, the relations of power, and thus reinforces social relations, the relations of production, relations of power. So too here, this is so in the social relationship of the state or the country. We have a natural feeling for people that we think live the same life as us. We have solidarity with them and mutual interest with them. As I said earlier, that you can see that as an extension of kinship, both physical and symbolic, to use Solon's sort of breakdown. But the state, which is a management of force, necessarily, it is an apparatus and administration of the legitimate use of force, itself must be represented by the country which you have mutual solidarity with. So that's what we are seeing. We see the symbol become the fetish. The symbols are the symbols of the state, of the country, become a fetish for our community, but drive our communities and limit our communities now that it is a fetish for our communities. This is a very Hegelian way of thinking. Back to Ollman. The government's privileged position as a voice of the fetish, the official interpreter of what it means and or calls for on any occasion, derives from its perceived legitimacy as the supreme organ of the social community, asterisk, and the nation state as this is actually a relatively modern invention. So we are looking at nation states pretty much back to early modern thinking, so 500 years. All right, back to the text. But when, as in the present moment in the United States, the legitimacy has reigned, patriotic fetishes are forced to do the double work of supporting the government's exclusive control over them, as well as the specific uses to which this control is put. Is this too great a load for these fetishes to bear? In the Crimean War, an English officer misinterpreted an order and directed a cavalry charge against a heavily fortified Russian position that led to the slaughter of the entire company of 600 men. Rather than fault the officer or question the sense of the soldiers who unquestionably committed suicide, the poet Tennyson famously wrote, "Someone had blurred, theirs is not to make reply, theirs is not to reason why, theirs is but to do and die. In the valley of death rode the 600. The message is clear. In war, patriotism consists of following orders which, without considering whether or not they are right or wrong, or even if they make any sense, love of country becomes the unquestioning obedience to the country's government. George Bernard Shaw once compared this attitude to "my mother, drunk or sober," which philosopher John Somerville rightly amended to "my mother's lawyer, drunk or sober," since the existing government is not the country, but only an agent acting in its name. Right? Your government is not you. You are not your government. This is Warren talking. When liberals tell you that, they are lying. Even if the sovereignty of the government really does legitimately come from you, and that's a big if, which there's little evidence for, even in quote democracies unquote. See how much public opinion actually affects policy outcome, and then compare it to the rich and what they get. You'll see how quickly that falls apart. Yet people still act, even socialists still act as if it is true that our government democratically represents our interests at the same time that we say that they do not and they are oligarchies. This has never made sense to me. It seems to be given into this illusionary community fetish, but nonetheless. So if you think about it this way, the government acts in the interest of and manages the nation in the form of a state and a capitalist society. Now, kingdoms and we're not quite states. We tend to transpose our understanding of human governments from like the early modern and modern periods, what we're living through right now, back onto kingdoms and tribal bands and chieftainships, etc. And you can't really do that. They're not really the same thing. All right. Taken together, Tennyson, Shaw, and Somerville offer a neat summary of what patriotism is and even more crucial doubts it raises. But the mystery of patriotism, what it drives, where it comes from, and how does it work, continues to elude us. To unravel the mystery, which seems to become more and more clouded with each new patriotic outburst, is the aim of our essay, The State, Alienation, and Patriotism. Why is the biggest governmental assault on the American Bill of Rights in the last 200 years packaged as the U.S. Patriot Act? And why is it the favorite rebuke directed against those who criticize it that they/we are so unpatriotic? Do I need to tell you that this patriotism is particularly dangerous to the left because it both isolates and confuses us? Outbursts of patriotism, such as occurred after 9/11, put us in collision course with the very people we want most to influence, since workers are often the most enthusiastic patriots. This also leads to easy dismissal of our criticisms and can even threaten our jobs, friendships, and personal security. Yeah, the whole working class patriotism thing is a bugaboo. One that I find actually in sociology to be more complicated by the actual opinions of working class people than what we project upon them that they are super patriots, but they're not unpatriotic either. And that is something that takes a little bit to disentangle. Marxist theories of state and alienation have something to teach us about the nature of patriotism. Asterisk, this is Warren talking. I wish Marx had finished his theories on the state a lot more clearly. An asterisk. There are, of course, at least two other Marxist inspired approaches pertaining to the subject. One passes through the study of the nation, its history and culture, and its particular identity, which provides to those who live or lived in it. The other treats patriotism as an ideology and examines where it distorts reality and how social succession serve the ruling class interests. So, what Bertell Ollman is describing here is one is the national question, and the other is nationalism as an ideology. And much ink has been spilled, and much of my time has been spent on explaining that here and elsewhere. Got diving into the wreckage, nailing it down, collaborations with Gene Bajelon over at TIR, all on this topic. Back to the text. While both of these approaches cast an important light on our subject, I believe Marxist theories of state and alienation are the most fruitful approach. The main focus of Marxist theory of the state is on the relation between the economic ruling class and the political means it uses, directly or indirectly, to rule. For grasping patriotism, however, other less known and much less used aspects of this theory merits our attention. Marx's view of the state as an illusory community. Marx posits that we all belong to two overlapping communities. The first is the social community, which derives its initial division of labor that assigns people direct tasks and makes certain amounts of cooperation necessary if everyone's basic needs are to be satisfied. Most people have a general, if vague, understanding of their interdependence in this community and appreciation for what others contribute to their well-being. aka no one can eat alone forever. I mean, maybe one person can, but humans as a whole would not survive if we did that. All right, back to text. But there's an emotional side to this experience that feeling a deep satisfaction and inner security that accompanies most forms of cooperation and membership in a community that treats helping others and being helped by others by them as a matter of course. Asterisk symbolic kinship explains this really well. But Bertell Ollman doesn't go to that because there's no Hegel or Marx corollary to it on asterisk. Marx calls the secondary community what we all belong to, the illusory community. Oh, excuse me, community. It contains the same people and involves the same interdependence. That's why it's a community. But here, one class holds economic and political power and uses it to present its distinctive class interest as the general interest, or as we shall now say, the national interest, for or what is good for everyone, asterisk, within that nation state, on asterisk. This is why it is an illusory community, a society that seems to belong to everyone and seems to be concerned with all who contribute to it, but really belongs to its ruling class and is only concerned with them and those whose help they rely on rule. Here is the real interdependence, which continues to exist, gets shaped into various social, economic, and political rules and institutions that privilege the special interests of this class. For those rules to be followed, excuse me, and the institutions that embody them to work effectively, however, the ruling class needs to construct an ideology that hides and defends its special privileges, making use of the very sentiments of solidarity and mutual concern that its own organization of society has dismissed as irrelevant. Throughout class history, especially under capitalism, patriotism under this or some other label has always stood at the center of this ideology. Marx's notion of the illusory community extends to the alienated activities that produce and continue to reproduce it, as well as its contradictory relations to the social community as an essential part of what the illusory community is. But how can the ruling class evoke beliefs and emotions associated with the social community from a populace whose daily lives are ordered by the illusory community? So, how can your social community be bossed around by the state, which has very specific interests, of which yours is only superficially and not really part of? How can the rulers do this without revealing their own narrow class interest? And how can the populace vent to beliefs and feelings rooted in social connectedness without threatening the very structures that squelch social solidarity? While patriotism is an amalgam of beliefs and emotions, the latter deserves to be treated first. Most patriotic ideas, after all, are largely rationalizations for feelings, and many patriots seem to be willing to act on these feelings in absence of any serious attempt to make sense of them. The Americanism commander of the Wisconsin the Americanism commander of the Wisconsin American Legion, yes, there is such an office, for example, once assured me that even though he didn't know what the American way of life was, I should not doubt his willingness to die for it. What is the key emotion that triggers such patriotic reactions? It is, in my opinion, it's not love as ordinarily understood, and not pride or anger, or fear or hatred, though all these are present to different degrees and in various combinations, depending on the individual and the occasion or provocation. Underpinning all these feelings, provided the emotional fuel is it, as it were, for the entire process, is the drive for social connectedness, for community, the need to belong to a group in which one counts and for which one counts, or thinks one does, and the pleasure we get out of when this need is satisfied, aka our tribal and kinship bands. When people complain about that's just tribalism, this is where I'm talking. I've always been confused by that because, like most things, are tribalism. That's how we work. That's how we organize ourselves. Don't lie to yourself about that. In fact, you don't have a self without it. The contrast of the individual as a self-reifying agent that can speak itself in very Hegelian policy parlance becomes aware with encountering another like itself of which it can differentiate itself from. You as an individual are depending on someone else of the same group that is recognizably similar to you and which you are also different. So pure individualism doesn't even make sense, which is why like self actually breaks down in solitary confinement, right? Outside of a social situation, your sense of self gets thinner and thinner and thinner. I don't even think this is psychologically really that debatable. This is why solitary confinement is a form of torture, because it disintegrates your sense of self. Back to the text. Patriotism feels good, and something most radicals, including this one, had a difficult time coming to terms with. Things that feel good generally are those that serve basic needs that are not being met. Think of how we feel when our pressing needs for food or sex are satisfied. I believe something very similar applies to patriotism, but the need in this case is not for patriotism as such, but for something else that in the present circumstances is best satisfied, if only in a partial and distorted manner, by patriotism. Asterisks. Symbolic kinship and need for community. This is Varn screaming what the answer to that, to what's causing us to mistake patriotism for the answer to. At issue are the very genuine human needs for fellowship and recognition that come from our membership in the human species, and as well as historically conditioned social needs for solidarity that arise out of our experience of cooperation and social community. In a life where people are constantly in competition with one another, however, where sharing and showing mutual concern are usually penalized and even ridiculed, asterisk, see Marxist writings on alienations. There's 4 kinds. Worker from worker is one of them. It's not just worker from your labor. In short, in the illusory community, there are a few occasions to express feelings of fellowship because we're all in such competition with each other. This is Varn just driving the point home. Hence, almost any opportunity for collective display is greedily taken up. Praying together in churches, or cheering together at sporting events, or singing and swaying together at concerts, or marching together in parades. Asterisk. This is why people go to rallies, even though they don't work. That's Varn talking. Unasterisk. And by work, we're assuming they're actually trying to make political change, not just, trying to form a vent. There is a great hunger for community here, one that people's current lives as workers, students, consumers, and citizens, even with the addition of religion, mass spectator sports, music, dance, and parades, does not and cannot satisfy, but that patriotism can, and in a particular way does. Patriotism often affords people the opportunity to vent their deepest communal emotions in all venues, 24 hours a day, in a socially acceptable, indeed socially praiseworthy way. For the emotionally hungry, this is heady fare. It is experienced as very pleasurable, and returning to the table again and again for more is hard to resist. Asterisk, why do you think political rallies are so popular if they go well? It's not about a reasoned argument, and if liberals think that, they've always been wrong. It's about emotional identification, which actually meets a real and not idiotic, not superficial human need that people are playing out in a way that is actually not in their quote interest. And this is universally true according to Ollman. Anyway, back to the text. The human drive for recognition plays a similar role. This is not simply a matter of wanting others to know that we exist, but of respecting who we are and what we do. And when that happens, we feel pride, but when it doesn't, we feel empty and even humiliated. But given the lives that most people lead in our society, how often do they feel pride? How often do they feel humiliated? Patriotism helps satisfy the drive for recognition by substituting the country to which we belong for the individual, and the pride evoked by the country's achievements, real or imagined, for the absence of pride in ourselves. Asterisk. This is what Zizek points out. The irony of pride in nation really is a pride for an identity for which you barely belong, for stuff that you didn't do just by being there, right? It substitutes for the pride that you should have and the stuff you do in your community for this abstract community, which there's nothing but symbolic representation in some state claiming the legitimacy of operating that. That's the text. At issue are the genuine human needs for fellowship and recognition that come from our membership in the human species, as well as historically additional social need for solidarity and spirits of cooperation in our social community. In life, we already talked about that. Steve Z. To prolong the pleasure they get from such recognition, people may be ready to make all sorts of personal sacrifices. When President Kennedy fabulously said, "That's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country," he was tapping into the sentiment. As a mode that privileges feeling over thinking, patriotism allows people to lose themselves in the moment, to surrender to their emotions, and to stop thinking altogether in lives of full of problems and no easy solutions. There's a tragic dimension to patriotism, of course. It is not only about people's willingness to sacrifice themselves on behalf of country, but also making the connection to those who have already made the ultimate sacrifice. The community that patriotic people strive to realize then stretches back to include our fallen soldiers, and an attempt is made to identify with their cause and their commitment they were supposed to have brought by it. Soldiers in times of war offer us an exaggerated form of patriotism, but they also represent the ideal form put forward for everyone to emulate in times of peace. Military funerals, memorials, and cemeteries all testify to the importance our culture gives, almost all cultures give, to establishing these bonds and to building a popular reflex upon the military model. So patriotism can, on occasion, evoke tears as well as pleasure, but in the absence of any alternative, that too can be satisfying if it provides some relief for the mourner's pain. I love how Ullman's just so direct about this. Like, you know, if this was Althusser, we'd be talking about theoretical and repressive apparatus. I mean, ideological and repressive apparatuses for 2 hours to totally remove you from what he's actually talking about. Even when he's right, he expresses it in a way that is convoluted. Soldiers, I read that. From the point of view of the emotions involved in, patriotism would appear to resemble a simmering volcano with periodic eruptions, some of which are powerful enough to destroy everything in its path. For this to occur, however, requires the help of symbols like the flag, the anthem, the Pledge of Allegiance, various monuments, and so on. The symbols arouse patriotism, they promote it, they channel it, they give it a language, traditions, and ceremonies. Asterisk. See Hobsbawm and Ranger's The Invention of Tradition, which talks about how tradition is used to do that. And when there isn't a real tradition, people just make one up. All right, back to the text. But the most important of all, they set up its immediate object, which is supposed to be the love and for which we must be ready to sacrifice, and that it is nothing that people address can actually recognize. All of our real life experiences are missing. The reason for this should be obvious. No soldier is going to run toward a machine gun fire on behalf of the flesh and blood people who live across the town from him, too many of whom are the wrong color or go to the wrong church or speak the wrong accent or speak with the wrong accent. He also doesn't like a great deal about his own actual way of life, whether at home, in school, or at work, none of which are much worth dying for or killing for. What is left, then, is the kind of lowest common denominator. What Americans supposedly have in common, a ghostly abstraction that we honor in the name of country. This is a country for which all our patriotic symbols point. Voided of all specific regarding on who is doing what to whom and why, the country is so understood retains all of its secrets, and the illusory community remains mystified and therefore as secure as ever. On the other hand, the very vagueness of country allows people to conflate it with their social community. Asterisk. You will notice the projection upon emotive abstractions like love, country, community, even as a way of manipulation. They're deliberately always left vague. This is why there is a certain analytic impulse that we actually should cultivate to ask people, what do you mean? Give me the definition, right? What am I pledging to? And it's the one thing in a lot of these cases that people don't want you to do because the mystification confuses self-interest and emotive identification. Anyway. And to react with patriotic symbols put forward by the former here being the quote, country or illusory community, as if they were the true expressions of the latter, the social community. Patriotic symbols can now be the bridge over which the positive emotions generated by social community pass into the existing class society. If my interpretation of patriotism gives much weight to the patriotic symbol, it is because I consider them much more than symbols. They're not merely representations, signs, or indications. They are also products of an alienated political activity. To pursue this point, we must turn to Marx's theory of alienation. Asterisk. I do wish that he cited Marx specifically more on this. I'm going to have to look up where this comes from. I know his theory of alienation. Go read the German ideology. But I think some of the more elements of this are a little bit harder to parse. For the flag, the anthem, the various monuments would not have succeeded so well in their symbolic work if they were not also embodied some powers that people have lost. The English poet Wordsworth offers one of the best summaries of Marx's theory of alienation when he writes, "Things that are in the saddle and they ride mankind." Marx was chiefly concerned with to demonstrate how this worked in the economic sphere of our lives, where under the conditions of capitalism, workers sell their labor power, leave them without any control over its use or its final product. Then, in a series of metamorphoses or transformations which arise out of the buying and selling in the market, these products can take on forms: value, commodity, capital, money, profit, interest rate, rent, and wage labor, which hide their origin in the alienated productive activity, assuming a mysterious power over the lives of their own creators. This is the most evident in the case of money, the exchange form of commodities, or in the general means by which value circulates among those who have a legal claim to some parts of it. I'm going to point out that Bertell actually gives us two definitions of money there that aren't copacetic with each other, but I'm just going to go on. I just want to point that out. I know that Eamon are probably get their ears are perked up there too. On one occasion, Marx calls money the alienated ability of mankind. It is that the workers were once but no longer are what they have lost, essentially mastery over the world for which they have made, in the process of transferring this power to the various value forms of their product and eventually to money. Now, money talks, money decides, money disposes, all of which is mistaken as coming from the nature of money as such, and not from the people from whom this power came, who are forced to submit, i.e., money talks because it represents people. And it's also a thing which we are existing in trading in the world. That duality shouldn't be lost upon us. The German philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach, from whom Marx borrowed the basic structure of his theory of alienation, says something very similar about religion. The believer's religious activities, such as praying, going to church, and the like, are seen to create a unique religious product, a god, an otherworldly projection of human qualities, and mainly reason, creative power, and love, that are used and given up in the very activities designed to serve him. This God is an immediate and most general product of the alienated religious activity, undergoes a series of metamorphoses which transfer some are part of his divine qualities to the object, places, and people, crosses, churches, saints, asterisks, almost anything that involves theory and Dasein associated with him. They are then contained in the same powers lost in creating God, and religious people react to them accordingly. Asterisk. I do think for Ebachian notions of religion and anthropology are way too simple, but I'm going to ignore that right now. All right, back to the text. In both the economic and religious realm, then the products of alienated activities are used to mystify and manipulate their own producers, i.e., you believe in God because you invented him, according to this theory, as they come under the control of a group of people, with the capitalists in the economy are priests, or ministers, or rabbis in a religion. The latter use their control over various forms of value in one case, and the God objects in the other, to dictate what are the acceptable ways of dealing with them, using money to buy what one needs, praying with the Bible in church when it proves insufficient, and so on. But directing the manner in which these alienated products can be used also helps shape the alienated activities that are responsible for producing them. It's a feedback loop. That's Barnes saying that. The same pattern of relations we can see above can be found in our political life, where people in their capacity as citizens engage in various forms of alienated political activities and conditions and for ends controlled by others who have a different and opposed interest. In the political sphere, the state is the alienated product to which citizens have transferred most of their power, above all, the distinctly human power to organize their own lives together as mutually dependent and cooperating members of society. All the thinking and feeling that goes into that. And we'll stop here. I'd like to thank my patrons, including my new Khan Il Kahanan patrons, who support us at the $10 or more level. This is Irish Legend and Strom M. And I'd like to thank you for all your support and enabling me to continue to do this. You can find the Patreon where we have more radical engagements and other things. Nailing It Down episodes, all the audio only archives for anything I've ever done that I have rights to is there. If you want more Varn, there's tons of it there. Usually 3 to 5 things a week go out on the Patreon. All right. Thank you so much, and we'll continue this in part 2.